what is the difference between awareness and consciousness, because they're often interchangeable, it seems to me, in a lot of discussions. And for me, they're very different. But I'm not coming from a philosophical background, just from my own kind of perception of it, really.
Right.
And then maybe we could also talk about prior to consciousness.
Right.
It was a book, wasn't it? Nisargadatta.
Yeah, that's the title of one of his books of dialogues, yes.
So before consciousness or prior to consciousness.
Yes, prior to the arising of consciousness. Yeah.
So all those things would be
great.
Interesting. Yeah. Unpick. So, I don't know who wants to start. I mean, I could talk. I mean, my thing, and I don't know if this is correct at all, because I'm not coming from a philosophical point of view. It's just that awareness seems to imply that there is somebody who is aware of something. So it implies to me already a duality somehow of something being aware of something else, external.
Right.
I don't know if that's correct or not, but that's how I see it.
Right.
As opposed to consciousness being something that's ever present, not dependent on another.
Yes.
Completely self-sufficient unto itself, you could say. But I don't know if that's a good starting point, or if that's even true. But I don't. But that's the way I see it.
Well, it's just a question of words, so we can use words however we like. But as you said just now, sometimes they're used interchangeably.
Yeah.
Although there is probably an important distinction to be made. I believe in some languages they don't even have two words.
Oh right.
Okay. Maybe Francis Lucille said in French you can't actually make a distinction. They don't have the different words.
Oh, okay.
I might be wrong about that.
Okay.
I can't remember who it was, but suggested that actually, but I've also heard that I'm also sure that, for example, Nisargadatta tended to use the words the other way round.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So that, I'm not sure that he does that consistently.
Yeah.
But that awareness is used as the sort of ever-present, awareness, without necessarily any trace of duality in it. Whereas,
so what does that mean then? Awareness. What?
Well, I mean, if we look at the words themselves, and it doesn't matter which way around we use them. But if we look at the word itself, the word consciousness, the root of it is from con, meaning with.
Yeah.
And shusness comes from the same root as the word, our word science.
Okay.
Which comes from to know.
Okay.
So there is a sense in which the word consciousness seems to imply a kind of a duality. You are there with the object of your knowledge.
Right.
So there's a kind of a duality built into the etymology of the word.
Yeah.
I mean, not that we have to take in notice of that particularly, because I think the same is true of awareness.
Yeah.
Because the word, it has the same root as is we use in our word of something to beware.
Yes.
Meaning be aware.
Be aware.
Yeah, so being aware, beware of, already in kind of means it's an object that you've got to look out for.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a kind of a duality there as well.
Right.
I think actually it's very hard for language not to contain the seeds of sort of dualistic conceptions in it.
Yes.
Almost whatever word you pick, the very functioning of language seems to happen inside a sort of dualistic framework.
Yes.
So it's very hard for language to point to something that doesn't have that duality.
Yes.
But I mean, we can, I think it's just a question of what we decide to mean by the words, as long as we're clear.
What, you and I?
Well, whoever. As long as whenever it's being talked about, we're clear about the distinction.
Yes.
It doesn't, that's all that matters, really.
Right. Okay, so the way you describe it then, the phrase, I hope we can hear with this noise going over anyway. The phrase then, more of how I perceive the word consciousness to be. So prior to consciousness would be something that is not even perhaps yet seen somehow, not witnessed, just completely pure potential, without any need to express itself or be seen.
I actually think before we go there, I think we can play around with consciousness and awareness a bit, and then we'll look at that.
Okay.
To me, I think the important distinction is between a mode of functioning that is clearly dualistic, and another mode of functioning that is not. So I'm thinking for example, if we use the word in the way round that you suggested, that you're aware of something, it's like there is a subject, a self, that is aware of an object, and you think of the subject and the object as separate. So it may be that the object will disappear and the self is left on its own, or the self goes away and the object is unobserved and there's not anything aware of it, but we think of the two things as being separate, the subject and the object. So that's a very dualistic way of talking. There is another sense in which, and I think everybody's familiar with this. But,
Do you want to
wait till that goes over.
Every 2 minutes, isn't it?
I thought they'd have gone away by now. There's another sense in which I think everybody is familiar with, I'm sure everybody's familiar with it, really, in which there is such complete absorption in whatever is happening that the distinction between the subject and the object vanishes. So, for example, I think T.S. Eliot wrote a poem about what happens when one is so absorbed in the music that one actually is the music. It's not like there is a separate self listening to this music, which is something. And
that's part of the attraction of playing something. I mean, I was feeling that a little bit earlier when we were playing. That's a very attractive state.
It's a very attractive state to be in. There's a complete lack of self-consciousness. There's no awareness. There's simply absorption, and even absorption's not the right word because there isn't an object. And they talk about that traditionally as the seer, the seeing, and the seen are one thing. And the hearer, the hearing, and the heard is one thing. So that the sort of the three aspects of the subject and the object and the verb of perception is really just one thing. And it's only later on reflection that we separate out the supposed subject and the thing that it was aware of and the act of being aware. That's something that is sort of added on later. That actually in the moment there is no self. There is no object perceived. There is simply perceiving as one thing. So I think that's an interesting distinction to make. And we could use the word consciousness for one mode and awareness for the other. So in your terms, I think we could use awareness for the dualistic one, where there's a subject and an object, and one is aware of the other, and they're thought of as separate. And consciousness is whereas consciousness is one with its object. Although, as I said, I've got a feeling that in a lot of Nisargadatta's dialogues, for example, he does tend to use it the other way round. And as I said, I don't think it matters at all, as long as one is clear about what you're talking about. So, I mean, I think that's worth, because in a sense, you could say that, and this is the other important thing to say about that distinction, is that if we take it the way around you initially introduced it, that consciousness is primary. And it may or may not then function or be thought of as functioning in a dualistic way. But not the other way around. Yeah, you can easily have, consciousness functioning in unity without any self-consciousness, without any.
Yes, absolutely.
That's happening all the time.
Not dependent on anything.
It's not dependent on anything.
No.
Whereas if you're talking about an apparent duality, and it is only apparent.
Yes.
The apparent self that perceives an apparent object.
Yes.
Well, that's something that's only an appearance and is intermittent and dependent in any case.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's a sense in which there's something inherently unsatisfying about a dualistic mode of perception, because it's almost like the self is always trying to lose itself in some delightful object.
Yeah. Well, I certainly felt that when I was meditation and wanting to, certainly in the early days, wanting peak experiences all the time, being very dissatisfied when you didn't get a peak experience,
and in fact some of those traditional meditation techniques suggest that you take a moment of sort of peak delight and actually reflect on that, because if you reflect on it deeply, you will actually see that in that moment there was no separate self. There was just the tasting of a delicious taste, or the hearing of a wonderful sound, and there was no distinction being made there. So there's a kind of a oneness inherent in it, and in a certain sense, the apparent separation is always unsatisfying. It's always
because it seems to me like with we were talking earlier about this sort of illusion of separation, that all these things are really, we never really were separate.
Yes.
You know what I mean? All these things. So, and it seems to me that consciousness, obviously, the way I think of consciousness is that it doesn't need us to perceive it. It doesn't need us to do anything, and therefore it's not kind of relational to this.
Yes.
It's completely self-sufficient on its own, you could say. And this kind of sense of needing to somehow get back in touch with it, or is a bit of an illusion in itself.
Yes, because there never really was any separation. I mean, to take the idea of that separate self as being sort of problematic, and needing to get back, that doesn't really make any sense.
No, it doesn't.
Because it's simply an appearance.
So we touched on this thing about prior to consciousness. Then, do you want to say something about that then?
I would, but it's not possible to say anything about it. Now, the difficulty, and I think, and again, I think it's a question of trying to be as clear as possible. But
did Nisargadatta talk about it? Because his book was entitled it, but that was a book of dialogues, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was an edited book, as far as I remember.
Yes.
It wasn't maybe his title.
Yes. No, he does attempt to talk about it, and the thing about it is, every time you try and describe something, what you're in the end describing is the content of consciousness. So to try and describe what is prior to that is kind of impossible, really. And in order to try and know what is prior to consciousness, kind of is inherently ridiculous. Because knowledge is a functioning within consciousness. So how can you know what's prior? So in that sense, you could say, the hand can never grasp itself, the eye can never see itself. But the hand is what's there in order to do the grasping. And the eye is what's there to do the seeing. So in that sense, you could kind of refer to it indirectly as being that which is prior to consciousness, that which enables consciousness to perceive its objects. But it's the idea that it stands in some kind of relationship to consciousness or its content is sort of inherently paradoxical, because relationships are only in consciousness anyway. It's a kind of like talking about what's prior to all that. It's a bit like trying to describe a black hole. I mean, the point about a black hole in physics is no information comes out of it. It's black because no light is coming from it. So it's kind of hard to describe except in negative terms.
Yes.
And I suppose what's really intriguing is when in meditation you contemplate, well, you are prior to consciousness. But how can you ever know that? I mean, that's why it's described as the arising of consciousness and the appearances is fundamentally a mystery. And unknowable. Because that which would like to penetrate the mystery and that which would like to know the mystery is already not prior, it's after.
Yes. I mean, in all these cases you're talking about a relational situation, aren't you? Something knowing something else, or something being aware of.
Well, I think that's part of the problem with a lot of the philosophical descriptions of this kind of stuff, because you hear, particularly in Vedanta, descriptions of the self, the universal self, the big capital S self, as sort of being the underlying substratum out of which everything arises.
Okay, and that's described as the self.
And that's described as the self and everything. But you see, that's all in relational terms.
Yes.
Still talking about things arising and subsiding.
Yes, sure.
And I think probably that's what fueled the sort of debate, the traditional and ancient debate between the Buddhists and the Vedantins, where the Buddhists wanted to talk about more of the void, the shunya, the emptiness, the nothingness.
Yes.
As a way of pointing to something which is prior to the arising of any sense of self, whether it's an individual self or a universal self.
Yeah. Do you think also, like, in terms of I don't know what, when things like the terms of enlightenment or realization are described, and I find this very interesting in different traditions. I mean, we were talking about it again a little bit this morning, like how you it's often described that someone has some sort of an experience of an awakening, or some experience of realization, and they own that somehow, and that becomes then another story in a kind of way. And I get the sense that it's really way beyond that something happens where the self kind of disappears, and in that disappearance there is a merging somehow of the two, and that's it. And then there isn't any more an object relational thing, and therefore that's why it's so difficult to describe it, because it's like it's not relational, it's not related to this, it's not related to a perception, it can only be that, and that's completely indescribable, and also any kind of path to that is indescribable.
And this is where it gets really tricky to talk about it at all. because if you talk about a path or a method, a means of approach, to this, then obviously you're then still in the situation of a hand trying to grasp itself, which is sort of futile. So in a certain sense, that the sort of more traditional idea of seeking and eventually attaining some kind of goal, or having some kind of goal of enlightenment or whatever.
But so many people seem to get caught up in that. I mean, even in the book we were reading this morning.
Yes.
I'm not going to mention names, but in that book, there was that definite sense of him having had an experience and then
now
being completely caught in that.
Now I'm awake.
I mean, that phrase, I am awake, or I am enlightenment, or I am anything.
I know.
In relation to this is complete absurdity. It is absurdity. Yes. So I mean, for me, that's a marker. So if anyone says that, well, okay, thanks, goodbye. It's all very interesting. It's completely.
I sometimes think of it a bit like, asking someone the question, "Are you asleep?"
Right.
If they answer you, they're not.
That's very good. I like that. That's true, actually, isn't it? Yeah, it's true.
I mean, this is the trouble. It can all start to sound so strange and everything, but we're talking about something that's so intimately familiar with.
Yeah.
Every night when we go to sleep, we vanish.
Yeah.
And it's not even that we do the vanishing.
Yeah.
It's just that which appears as us ceases to appear as us.
Yes.
For a time, and then we reappear.
Yes, and
miraculously, actually.
Inhabits a fantastical world of dreams.
Yes.
All amazing things.
So we're all familiar with that. However wonderful our day has been.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we just crave oblivion.
Yeah.
So it's not like that this is something strange to anybody.
Yeah.
We all require rejuvenation and refreshment.
We die without it.
We die without it.
Yeah.
So it's
we're mad.
So in a sense, you could use the unconsciousness of sleep as a sort of analogy or metaphor for the unknowability of what is referred to as prior to consciousness.
Yeah.
But it's nothing unnatural or weird. It's no more unnatural or weird than going to sleep is.
Yeah.
But it does. But reflecting on it in that way does make the whole idea of seeking and a path to attain something. When even if it all goes really well, what are you left with? You're sitting there holding something that you can't hold on to.
Yeah.
And even the one who's doing the holding is not going to last for much longer.
No.
So it's sort of nonsense in a way.
Yeah. I remember that when I first met Ramesh, that was one of the things that really kind of struck me. That I suppose because at that time I've been really focused on meditating and I really enjoyed it.
Yes.
Really fantastic. I felt great, but there was a craving. There was definitely a craving for attaining something or changing something or having some peak experience or whatever it was. And there was, I don't know why, but it just came to me when I met him that this was never going to get me anywhere.
Right.
Which was kind of sad. Kind of way, because I really enjoyed it. But that like there was a thing that belief that this was going to somehow lead from A to B. You know what I mean? And that B was what I wanted.
Yeah.
That was not going to happen that way. It wasn't going to happen that way.
Right.
Anyway, that craving in itself completely got in the way.
Yes.
And almost any kind of move away from now, you could say, from what is, would detract from that. And it was very interesting. It was very powerful. It was quite a small thing, but it completely changed. I remember giving up meditation at that point.
Right.
From having to meditate
right.
an hour a day.
Right.
And if I didn't, I'd feel kind of bereft
Right.
to
Right.
not
Right.
overnight. It's quite
Yes. Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about there is wanting a particular mode of experience.
Yes.
You want to have a kind of experience.
Yes. And you want this thing, this me, to somehow have a breakthrough, have to change,
Yes.
to be something else apart from what it is.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that idea that it's might have been in a state of continual bliss, or
Yes.
might have had an amazing consciousness of everything and
Yes.
be like that for the rest of its life. It's very
Well, I mean,
but it's
well, I don't think it's altogether even impossible. I mean, any kind of experience is possible.
yes.
You know, I mean, I think that it is possible for the self to experience all kinds of things,
Absolutely.
and to be expanded on all
Absolutely.
kinds of levels, and to become. I mean, I think there's a wealth of psychic experience that's available.
Yes. Well, I mean, you know, people. I mean, with when you're taking a drug, it's not the drug, is it? It's like there's something that opens
Yes.
in you.
Yes. It's just that
That's available to you.
Yes. It's just that from the point of view of that which is prior to consciousness, it doesn't really matter
Yeah.
what the content of consciousness is, however contracted it is, or however expanded it is, or the quality of it, or everything. I mean, it's just not relevant.
No. No.
And the other sort of tantalising thing is as well that is that it's very difficult to even describe that which is prior to consciousness, or the realization of that which is prior to consciousness, as any kind of event.
Mm-hmm.
As
Yes.
anything that actually, something that it's not something that happens to you,
Sure.
because that's still casting it in that.
Absolutely.
It's never going to be anything that happens to you.
No.
It's not anything that's ever going to happen to the contracted sense of
Yeah.
self.
To an individual. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not. It just doesn't make any sense to,
Yeah.
to talk of it or think of it in
No.
that way.
Absolutely not. No.
So again, even to sort of aspire after it as a happening that you would like to somehow induce,
Yes.
or
Yes.
just hope that it's going to happen. It's going to happen one day.
Yes.
That's already casting it in as if it were an experience, as if it were going to be the content of one's
Yes.
consciousness. So it's I mean, all you can say is that it's unknown and unknowable.
Yes.
Which is sort of tantalising in a way, but I suppose it's why you can only speak of it, if you're going to speak of it at all, negatively.
Mm-hmm.
The mystical traditions often, for example, in mystical Christianity, they talk about the via negativa,
Mm-hmm.
the negative path, the negative way.
Right.
You can only say it's not this, and that's in Vedanta as well, isn't
Yeah,
it?
neti,
Not
neti.
this, neti, neti, not this,
Yeah.
not this. And that's what they're trying to,
Yeah.
gesture, at it by way of saying, it's the Sufi mystics as well. As a matter of fact, it is not so.
Yeah.
Is one of their aphorisms.
Uh-huh.
Whatever you think it is, it's not that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you think realistically, I mean, you could say then that you can only be that, not that you were ever not that anyway, but that's all that it can only be expressed through you. We were talking a bit about it last night, weren't we? how this can be expressed through a physical form, and how that can be almost quite contagious when you're around it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because you can't, it's not something you can know, but you can be it, right? Would you say?
Well, you already are it.
Yeah, well, exactly. But you could be more or less.
Do
you think that's true?
More or less. More or less. Well, it's tricky, isn't it? Because you're talking about gradations of. I mean, is that any longer prior to consciousness? If it's
yeah, but we were talking yesterday about people who obviously have had some glimpse of that, or some realization or something, and yet they still have fears.
Right.
So for me, it seems to be that then is not a total I'm going to say realization, but I don't want to use that word. So
what you're trying to say is that there should be some implications for the content of consciousness.
Well, when you look at someone like maybe Ramana, obviously we never met him, but or some of the people that we've known, you and I, some of the teachers, where they embody it as an energetic presence that is clearly embodied in every cell of their being, you could say.
Right.
Which is very different from someone who's had a glimpse of it, or can go in and out of that, and maybe get a sense of consciousness operating. This is maybe another discussion, but
I think
I find it very interesting.
I think that it is important to make a distinction here, because it's difference between being in a more expanded state of consciousness and a more contracted one.
Yes. Well, okay. I mean, the reality, of course, you can't ever not be in. You can never not be that, can you? But so, what is it then that's being? So there is an allowing it to be expressed more fully, perhaps in some people than others, in certain situations than others, perhaps. You know what I mean? So what is that then? What is the expression of that? Pure expression of consciousness through an individual, an apparent individual.
No, I
think
I think, John, here you're thinking of something different.
Okay.
You're thinking of whether a highly expanded state of consciousness can function through an individual.
Yes.
Right. Everything is an expression of consciousness. Yes. Everything is.
Yeah, of course.
So whether it's contracted or whether it's expanded.
Yes, no, I understand that. Doesn't make any difference.
Makes no difference whatsoever.
No, I understand that.
So, but
having said that, some people,
right,
like possibly Ramana or other people, seem to express it more fully, or people project that onto people. I don't know.
I don't think it makes any sense if everything is an expression of consciousness to talk about things being more fully expressed or less expressed.
Okay.
That simply doesn't make sense.
Yeah, but you feel that, don't you? I mean, some days you'll feel, I'm so
no. Some days one might feel one's consciousness is more expanded.
Yes.
Or more contracted.
Yes. No, and I agree.
I think what you're talking about is trying to, and we've both experienced this, expressing a more expanded state of consciousness.
Yes.
Consistently.
Yes.
And in a certain sense, for that to happen, things have to get out of the way.
Yes. That's all. Yeah. Yes. Particularly this sense of individuality has to get out of the way.
Yes.
This concern with, and that's why I was bringing up this thing about fear. If you express fear of flying or whatever it is, then there is obviously an identification with this this individual who fears death or fears something, right? That in itself is a contraction, surely.
Yes.
Yes.
But
And
that's
it's an
no less.
identification with that contraction.
Yes, that's right. But that's no less an expression of consciousness than than its absence.
Yeah, I accept that in the sense that everything is.
Right.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, if you think of it in terms of wanting to nail down what enlightenment is, are you talking then about having access to more expanded states of consciousness at will?
No. I'm talking about the limitations, or possible limitations, to full expression, unbridled expression of that. Because there is a certain need in us as with this physical form and our nervous systems and our minds, that we want to be able to. We don't like feeling contracted, right?
Right.
Do it. It's uncomfortable physically and
Right.
so we are constantly looking somehow for that full expression.
Yes.
To be liberated, you could say liberated from our limitations of self.
Yes.
Right? That's why we like playing music and
Yes.
doing art.
Yes.
Yeah. That's what we kind of want. This expression of consciousness as its form, as its physical form, with its nervous system.
Right.
That's what it wants. It doesn't want to be bound, right? It doesn't want to feel bound. It's not bound, but it doesn't want to feel bound.
Right.
It wants to express that liberation. That's what it wants. All the time, ideally. It wants to feel it. Isn't it?
Yes, but I still think it's important to make. Well, you've already agreed, but at the end of the day, whether there is a feeling of being completely uninhibited, and expanded, and you think, this is no limitations, fantastic, whether you feel like that or whether you feel like that,
sure. Yes,
there's still.
I know it doesn't make any difference. I appreciate that.
Well, the point is that there's still a sense of self in that.
Yes.
There's still a sense of there being, now there is full expansion, or I am fully expanded.
I'm not even sure that's necessarily true. That it doesn't have to be that. It's just a natural thing in our bodies, I think, I mean, I suppose the thing is, like, ultimately one can also have the knowledge that it doesn't make any difference whether
I think
one feels contracted or not. That, and therefore that is in itself completely liberating. And it's also the fact that it's much more likely then that you get less stuck in things like fear and contraction and feeling negative, or you know what I mean? Because that identification with that, it's transitory. If you're feeling shitty, or you're feeling tired, or you're feeling, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but I think the essential thing is that the reason, what you talk about being stuck, there's no possibility of being stuck because there's no one to be stuck.
Right, so how come then you would have a fear of flying, or you would have a fear of...
But that's just arising. That's just arising. It's not...
Okay.
Because otherwise what you're saying is there can be no liberation if there's any of this, if there's this,
No,
if
I'm
there's
saying
this,
that.
if there's this.
No, I'm not saying that.
That's all got to go.
No, I'm not saying that at all. No, I know it doesn't make any difference at all. But there is a fact that...
Because you see, look at it from the other point of view. Are you suggesting that the presence of fear makes liberation, will prevent liberation? Because again,
But I think
what is prior to consciousness
sure
is not going to be affected in any way by the content of consciousness. So,
right. But I mean, okay.
so nothing. If there is going to be a falling away of the self, then there's nothing in consciousness that can prevent that any more than there's anything in consciousness that can induce it. Because it's prior. That's what it means.
Yes. Sure.
It's simply irrelevant.
Yes.
But there's nobody in there going, yay, great, now it's irrelevant. That's still, it's possible for the self to experience that, you see. It's possible for the self to experience a great expansion, a great feeling of detachment, to see everything arising as passing states of itself.
Yeah.
That's a very empowered and expansive feeling.
Yeah.
But it's a bit like that Nisargadatta quote I showed you earlier, where the sense of self can either be like, a small sense of self, or it can be massive.
Yeah.
But it's still got a centre defining and a circumference.
Yeah.
Yeah. And in the end, it doesn't matter how big that gets.
Yeah.
It's still really the same kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with you.
So there comes a point, where he said in that quotation, there comes a point when it's seen as false and given up.
Yeah.
So I think what happens is that after a long period of, feeling contracted or whatever, it's possible for consciousness to expand. And in that expansion, there's a great feeling of liberation and release.
Yeah.
But it's also quite likely that the self will appropriate that.
Sure. Oh yeah, that happens all the time.
And so then you get what we were talking about yesterday as well.
Yeah.
People saying, well, I am now awake, and I'm now liberated.
Yeah.
And they're comparing a present mode of experience to a previous mode of experience.
Uh-huh.
But you're comparing different contents of consciousness.
Yeah.
And none of that has anything to do with what's prior.
No.
So I think that's where it's very easy to get confused. I'm not even suggesting that one is better than the other. You know what I mean? It's not like kind of enlightenment in that sense. That which is prior to consciousness. I mean, it's useless. It's useless
in terms of this world.
Yeah.
Functioning and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's not.
Yeah. But we've talked before about this thing about, say, the body. How important is the body in all this? And I still find it very intriguing how certain people can almost express that through every cell of their body, and when you're with them, you feel it. You get drawn into these very still states, just by being around them. And then other people, who are clearly teachers and have had some shift or something's happened, and yet they don't. And they still have possibly. I remember one particular teacher I went to, who, what really put me off was when he said before a talk that he was really scared of giving a talk. Right. And to me, that indicated that he had some vested interest in his image, or and which obviously then means he's got a huge interest in him as an individual, right? Having attained something, you know what I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
And so immediately I think, okay, well, he's not what I'm after. But I might be wrong. Maybe it's completely irrelevant that he felt that. But it seems to me that the more, I mean, I suppose if you look through history, that the people who fully express that in every aspect of their being, physical, mental, emotionally, someone like the Buddha, obviously we don't know what the Buddha was like, or Christ, or...
But you keep talking about those who fully expressed it.
Yes.
If we're talking about that which is prior to consciousness, everything is an expression of that. So there can be no more or less expressing of that.
I know that.
I think what you're talking about is a much more expanded state which wants to express itself.
Yes, I suppose that
physically.
Yes.
It's a much more expanded state which knows no fear.
Yes, possibly.
Yeah.
And maybe that's just a matter of personality, or upbringing, or genetics, or I don't know.
Yes, I think that's right. From the point of view of that which is prior to consciousness, everything's all the same. I mean, experience is all the same. Whatever experience, on however elevated a level, or however expanded a level, or however limited a level.
Yeah.
It's all the same. It's an appearance.
Yes.
But the kind of thing I think you're talking about is it? I suppose it depends on what you're after. I mean, you're going to a teacher and you find, well, here's somebody who's still subject. There's still their fear arising, or this arising, or that arising, and that's not what I want. I want to be hanging out with people who are, have this, who are fearless, and
That's true. I'm more attracted to that.
Yeah, you're more attracted to that. So who blame you? I mean, that's. But that's why, when you said, can we talk about consciousness and awareness and that which is prior? I'm kind of, that which is prior. Oh, right. Because that's a bit more dangerous, right?
Yes.
Because that isn't going to pander. Because you see, from that perspective, I mean, not only is there nothing you can say, it's unknowable, it's unknown, it's a mystery how everything arises apparently in that. But there's nothing you can do with it either.
No, that's true.
There's nothing you can. So.
But I would have said that when.
What you seem to be saying is that if that happens to somebody.
No, I'm not saying that.
Then they would be like this.
No. No, what I'm saying is, it seems that there is a disappearance. So at some point, there is a disappearance of the I. I'm not even talking about necessarily a notion of an I or an individual.
Right.
And in that disappearance, there is only that. You could describe that as prior to any self-awareness, any division, there's only that. That's all there is.
Right.
There is no relationship to anything else. That's just out of itself as it is.
Right.
So, from that perspective, you could say, it doesn't have a perspective, but if there was a perspective, nothing matters. Nothing can possibly be any different, or it's like, because there is no relationship to anything. Yes, exactly. There's only that. There's no knowing. There's no. Well, so, but when you say there's only that, that's all there's ever been. Yes, but and everything that ever appeared, was only ever that. But you could also describe that in that sense of an individual disappearing, you could say, or then that is all there is, and therefore, in that individual, there would appear to be more of an expression of that. You could almost say a conduit to that. I don't know if that's true. No. That's what you feel around some people, though, isn't it? That's what we felt. I think with someone like Mrs. Tweedy or yes, or with Baba Muktananda.
The point about it is, when you talk about the disappearance of the self, and then after the disappearance of the self, there's a sort of fuller expression, right?
Well,
you're talking.
I'm not talking about full expression. It's like there isn't any division. There isn't any hindrance.
But there never was.
Yeah,
the self never was. It was only ever an appearance.
Yeah. Yes, of course.
So there was nothing ever hindering anything. It was simply an appearance.
Okay. So if that is known, right?
But it's not known.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. It's unknowable. There's no.
Yeah.
There's whoever or whatever thinks they know that is a self. Is itself an appearance?
Yeah. Absolutely. But
I think you're mixing it up with different qualities of experience, and I think it's possible for some individuals apparent individuals to function on an apparently very expanded state, and for to have and to express that.
Right.
Yeah, they are expressing that for sure. It's the same with. I mean, I don't think it's not something that's sort of even all that esoteric or rare. If you transpose it to other areas of life, I mean, we're both musicians, and there are some musicians we know who are very, very talented, and they express the music so beautifully and so effortlessly.
Yes.
And there are others who struggle more with it.
Yes.
And we're all somewhere on that spectrum.
Yeah.
There's always people better than you, and there's always, hopefully, you're progressing as well.
Yeah.
And you could say that in the presence of a master musician,
yes,
those qualities of effortlessness are stimulated in you.
Yes, that's absolutely true.
And when you work with those master musicians, you yourself,
yes,
so I think it's like that.
Yes.
There are people who do function on a very expanded plane.
Yeah.
And by hanging out with them, that might rub off.
Yeah.
And it might very well be something that you greatly desire. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Mm. But it's no less and no more an expression of that which is prior to consciousness.
Mm.
Because very quickly then, you start slipping into a sort of progressive model of things, that you expand and expand and expand, and then finally at the end of all your expansion you disappear. Well, you never disappear because you never were. You start ranking people according to how much they've disappeared.
But we do that, don't we? But we do that anyway. We do it.
No, we do, yeah. I know. It's silly.
I mean, you look at someone like Trump and you think, I mean, in terms of the hierarchy of spirituality.
Yeah.
But I suppose, maybe from God's perspective, then there is no difference.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Well, was that useful?
No.
God. Oh dear. No, but it has cleared up for me, certainly, a little bit more about consciousness. Knowing the root of the word consciousness actually is quite helpful, because within there is a knowing, and I think that's quite helpful.
I think that's very important, because there are definitely models of enlightenment, traditions of enlightenment, ways of talking about enlightenment, as enlightenment is the ultimate knowing. Ultimate. I mean,
who talks about that then?
Well, in the sense of, our friend Nara's just emailed me about quoting Ramana as the self is the ultimate perceiver. You know, is not caught up in the illusion, but is the ultimate perceiver of all of that. And so there's the idea that to be enlightened in the way that Ramana was enlightened means being established as the knowing perceiver of all the states that can be, and not falling for the illusion. And so there's this idea of a sort of there's still a perception going on, there's still a knowing going on, there's still a so enlightenment is a sort of the ultimate the ultimate way of
but that's still a perception.
So that's important to understand, that when you talk about knowing, perception, feeling, all of those kind of things, they are all function. That's all functioning, within consciousness itself. So then you get to this, as I said, is a paradoxical situation where that which is prior to consciousness can never be known by consciousness. It's not an object of knowledge, nor is it a subject of knowledge. Nor is it something which is sitting there thinking, well, I am that.
Sure.
And that's where you get the interesting differences in the traditions. As I said before about Buddhism, which sort of emphasised the no self, anattama, as opposed to Vedanta, which talks about the ultimate self. It's interesting stuff. It's very interesting. But it's when you try and talk about it, it's fraught with paradox.
I can't remember the bit in one of the Kashmir Shaivism texts, but when they talk about an object and a perceiver of that object, and how a sage is different from normal, because people generally experience the very word we use, our language is based on that principle of an experiencer. Of an I. Somehow. And an object.
Our language is based on subject, verb, object. So it's inevitable that you start, when you start talking about enlightenment, that you start casting it in terms of subject, verb, object. There's the enlightened self. Which sees objects differently, and it's seeing. But really, that whole setup of the subject perceiving the object. That whole setup is something that can fall away.
Well, that's what I think. I can't remember what the exact quote, but that was the thing. That the sage is aware of the illusion of that. That's all. That's the only difference.
Except that it depends how pernickety you are about language. But there are those who say that even to say you're aware of it,
but that comes back to Ramana's. We were talking about earlier.
But it sounds like
it's very subtle, isn't it? It's very easy to get caught in these things.
Absolutely. I mean, the spiritual world, the spiritual marketplace, full of teachers of traditions and different practices, and is absolutely fraught with all of this, rife with it, because you get people who are elevated as teachers because they know something. And they're all their followers who are trying to, by following this teacher, they're trying to acquire the same knowing, or trying to get into the same state that the teacher's in.
And I suppose, coming back to what we were talking about earlier, particularly if they've got charisma. Because charisma seems to be completely irrelevant in this whole thing. But we're naturally attracted to that. And maybe they also have some sense of self-importance, or some need to be seen or appreciated, or all these things might come into the equation.
They definitely do come into the equation.
Muddle the water.
Really?
Make it very muddy and difficult to unpick. because of our natural tendency to associate peak experiences with a particular individual, or ascribe it to special powers or some special knowledge or something that we haven't got.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, it's very dangerous territory. And so, just to finish off, then where we started with awareness. Then, so how would you define awareness then in this context?
Well, again, it's like we said at the beginning. I can sort of see it as we can talk about it as in a dualistic way. As I said, we talk about, I had a good experience, I had a nice holiday, there was all of the things that I was aware of or conscious of in my holiday, as, me experiencing something.
Yeah.
So there's the subject, verb, object. And then I think it's worth making a distinction between that and when the seer, the seeing, and the seen are one.
Yeah.
And that's a lack of a self-consciousness, a lack of an object as being other. It's the kind of functioning, one sees in a young infant, or some, when before they've developed a sense of self, as being a separate seer or hearer, or just a functioning in kind of unity or in oneness. So there's there's sort of a dualistic functioning. There's and whether you want to call that awareness, and then a sort of a sense of oneness, that kind of functioning, I would call that consciousness. And then there's that which is prior, and it's best not to talk about that at all, because you can't. And if you really think of that, it's not something that can be talked about, not something that can be experienced, and not something that can be known in that way. But nonetheless, everything that arises in that. So
good. Let's get Good. I think that'll do.
We've sorted that one out then?
Yeah,
okay,
good.
Right.
Yeah.